MeshKit 3.1 introduces some powerful new features to untile and combine mesh renderers. In this video, we'll explore how to combine and texture Atlas and Mesh Renderer with problematic UVs. The bungalow mesh you see here contains 4 submeshes, each with its own material. If we try to combine it right now, there will be an obvious problem. As well as having submeshes that we will need to separate, we cannot texture Atlas an object that already has a renderer attached. Let's first go ahead and separate the submeshes. We'll switch over to the Separate tab and click the Separate button. This will separate the 4 submeshes of the bungalow into 4 individual objects. One for the windows, one for the door, one for the walls, and one for the roof. This process should now solve the submesh issue. If we try to combine the object at this point, MeshKit will remind us that the custom atlasing component can't be set up yet. This is because the original mesh renderer of the bungalow is still attached to the object. We'll need to remove it to continue. We can easily do this by right-clicking on the mesh renderer and mesh filter components and selecting Remove Component. We can now proceed by going back to the Combine tab and clicking the Setup Combine button. You'll notice this screen is very similar to the combined skinned mesh renderer setup. First, we'll use the drop-down templates to get us started with a standard shader setup. We're also making sure that we're baking the color properties into the main texture and creating new lightmap UVs. There are also new advanced pixel processing options available in MeshKit 3.1. Right now, we can skip this. Next, we have Atlas modes. We can create a single atlas for each shader found, or force all the shaders to use the standard shader, and therefore have the lowest possible number of textures. As our objects are already using the standard shader, this won't make much difference, but we'll force the standard shader anyway. Next, we set up the maximum atlas size. 8192 is the best quality and is usually the best choice. We also have the option to set up the maximum number of textures for each atlas. The defaults seem fine right now. Finally, we need to set up a saved asset folder to store our new assets. This needs to be a directory inside the project's assets folder. Let's go ahead and give it a name and save it. Now that the combine asset is set up, let's see if we can combine the bungalow. MeshKit has detected another problem regarding the UVs on this mesh. It appears that the original modeler used UV tricks in order to get the texture to repeat, and this causes UVs to be outside of the 0 to 1 range, which is actually incompatible with texture atlasing. MeshKit will allow us to try and do it anyway, but it's a much better idea for us to fix it. This is where the new MeshKit Untile tool comes in. Let's click into the Untile tool, select the first child of the bungalow game object in the hierarchy, and then set up the Untile component. As we'll need to run the Untile tool on each of these child objects anyway, let's go ahead and add the Untile setup to each of them now. To understand how the Untile tool works, let's start by looking at the game object of the bungalow's walls. There are 2 modes for the Untile tool. We can either try to rescale the UVs to fit the 0 to 1 space, which will often require custom texture edits later, or we can rescale the UV with a special type of texture atlasing to try and fix it. We can also get a report of the current mesh's UVs by clicking the Scan UVs button. If there are problems, it will show us the details. Let's try both modes out, starting with the Rescale to Fit mode. Looks like we forgot to set up our saved assets folder. It's usually a good idea to separate these out, but for the sake of time, we'll just use the same folder we previously created for the bungalow. Then, we click the Untile button to run the tool. You'll notice that this mode has removed the tiling of the bricks, but it requires quite a bit of custom texture work to fix this manually. Luckily, we have another approach, the Rescale with Atlasing mode. The only thing we need to tell the tool is the maximum atlas size we want. This is probably overkill, but we'll go with 8192 to start with. If you accidentally use the Unity keyboard to undo like I just did, you will also need to tell the tool to undo the untile using the button. Then we can simply untile the object again using the new settings. We've speeded up the video here as atlasing 8192 textures do take a significant amount of time. As you can see, the Untile tool has fixed the problem of the UVs by creating a new texture in its place with all the tiling built in. However, 8192 textures will make atlasing difficult due to the texture space it's using. So let's try it again, this time using a 4096 Atlas. It looks like 4096 will work well here, as there is hardly any difference between the 8192 version. Now that we've found the settings that work well, let's go ahead and roll it out to the other objects and untile those too. We will have to set up the saved asset folder on each of them before pressing the untile button. When we're done untiling the UVs, we should now be ready to combine the bungalow with texture atlasing. This process can take a while depending on the number of shader properties, number of objects, and texture size. We'll speed up the video here as 8K textures require a lot of processing time. The process is now complete and looking good. Let's enable the old objects so we can compare them side by side. The new version looks pretty much the same as the old one. However, the new building now uses a single object and contains atlases with all the merged data. We're now effectively using a quarter of the draw calls of the original mesh. To conclude, we've looked at an example mesh that is riddled with problems such as submeshes and incompatible UVs. We've also shown how MeshKit's unique tools and workflows can optimize your meshes for great performance and take your games to the next level. Thanks for taking the time to check out MeshKit.